Kari, what's your favorite piece to conduct? Oh, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, yeah, should be okay now. Probably as hesitant as Kathleen to answer that question. I think one answer could be that the conducting technique that we use was pretty much devised for romantic music. And in a way, it often has sort of the richest palette, as it were, for the conductor to use. You know, when we come to really complex new music, it's more about keeping it together. Or then when you go back to the Renaissance, it's much more about sort of beating clearly. So I think in a way, I'd probably enjoy conducting romantic music most. But if I had to name a piece, I'd say the St. Matthew Passion. Just because it's big and I will never get it. So it's just a nice thing to have in front of you all the time. And you can always just get better at it, but you'll never master it.
I was fortunate enough in 2016 to attend a performance of the St. Matthew's Passion in the Concertgebouw. And it was on Good Friday. I just happened to be there during the Easter season, and I'll never forget it. It was a transformative experience. And Les, what's your favorite piece to conduct?
I've got to say, I'm with my colleagues on this. You know, it's impossible to pick. Incidentally, in March of 2016, I got to conduct the St. Matthew Passion for the first time. And it was literally a week after I closed 6 performances of Madame a Butterfly with Vancouver Opera. And I got to tell you, when I look back on, like, that was one of the happiest times of, you know, creatively getting to do such different repertoire to absolute masterpieces. I was feeling very lucky. And so, I mean, there's a couple. I've also had the chance 2 years ago to do Mahler 8, which is a work I experienced as a boy soprano for the opening of Roy Thompson Hall in Toronto with Sir Andrew Davis before he became knighted. He was the conductor, and that was my sort of moment of like, wow, this is what music can be, and that kind of opened up my world as a kid in a big way. So that's a piece I feel just very lucky to have touched once. I'd love to do it again, but who knows? I'm not holding my breath.
And Cassie, what about you? What's your favorite piece to conduct?
Well, I also have to agree with my colleagues. There's just so much out there that it's impossible to pick. If I had to name something, it would probably be the 4th movement of the Brahms Requiem. But in general, I think over the last few years especially, I've been really focused on seeking things to conduct and teach for the first time, pieces that I've never conducted before, because I still feel like very early in my career, and there's so much out there, so much music to get to know. And even though it can be a pleasure to revisit beloved works and favorites, and there can be, you know, even an opportunity to grow by revisiting something with a new perspective and a new level of experience, I feel like my primary mindset has been that if I have the opportunity to program something new to me or to the community or, you know, to the world or whatever, it's a priority for me to try and do that. And I think especially right now with everything that's going on in the world and with the Black Lives Matter movement at the forefront of our collective conscious, many of us really desperately want to address the issue of how systemic racism has affected, perhaps unintentionally or unknowingly or subconsciously, but nevertheless significantly, which I think is the point, our programming. So I think it's as important as ever to put aside attachments to old favorites and put a renewed effort into diversifying our curriculums and outputs, and to do that by setting the intention to educate ourselves first and then in turn to help educate others in that way.
I couldn't agree more, and it's something we've been reflecting on as well as an organization. Is we have these old favorites, and I was waiting for somebody to mention the Brahms Requiem because it's stunning. It's I can't think of something I find more peace listening to. Maybe not the first movement. it's not as peaceful. But when he sets Psalm 84, it is absolutely stunning. But I think you're right, and we have to make efforts to look for compositions to bring to choirs from a more diverse audience and a more diverse compositional background, and just bring awareness. And I've been talking to some jazz musician friends about that too, and they said, we've been playing the music of Black people our whole lives, and what have you guys been doing? And we're just sitting with these questions and really trying to find some meaningful answers, not answers that we can just put out quickly. Some answers come out quickly, but it does take some time reflecting, for sure. And I want to ask Kari this question, just because I feel Kari's going to be the person to answer this in a way that we're not expecting. Kari, do you have any wacky ideas for concerts that you'd never dream of trying in a live concert setting, but that you're not afraid to now on the internet?
Not really, because I haven't been afraid of wacky ideas before either. I mean, I've been through a couple of processes which have started with, I think my favorite one is that I sat on a bus and I said, I want to do something about birds and I want video. There was no other agenda. And about 2.5 years later, we did this amazing concert with sort of videos tailor-made to commission pieces. So, I mean, it's wackiness is there all the time. And I don't think the internet sort of makes it more plausible as such. I think it's just, we can be imaginative and wacky whenever we like. Of course, I mean, there are some forms, I guess, which would be more natural, short forms to video material, but and you know, the composition of music and pictures and moving picture is of course a lot easier on video than it is in a concert. But I think, you know, the creativity can exist in whatever boundaries, even in ones that look very traditional and restricted. There's still a lot of creativity and improvisation going on always. I don't think, you know, you need to be worried about that. But so I think we can just be, well, okay, one point is that there is a fear that people will become even more traditionalistic once we come out of this virus. But I'm not afraid of that, really. I think, you know, we'll again be creative and look for new paths in the box that we have post-COVID or mid-COVID or wherever it is. But what I'd just like to encourage everyone to be wacky and be brave and do stuff which is wonderful, which you believe in.
I agree with that. So Kathleen, my question is, what has this process of transitioning to more online stuff been like for you, and how has it affected your mission statement or your vision for your choral groups?
It's a great question. We had a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions behind the scenes about how we were going to navigate this and what our priorities were going to be as we get through this time of indeterminate length. So we did actually go very first back to our mission statement. Why do we exist? What are we doing? I'm talking primarily about the Amadeus Choir here, that has a mission to create choral community, to perform and engage new works, to educate emerging artists, and to do choral music at a high level. So we looked at all of those facets. Who do we serve? Our members, our audience, and the emerging artists and professional artists in our community, and how can we meet all of those goals in a digital environment? Some of them look very different. Some of the ways that we do that look very different. But it was actually became very clear when we went to our mission and vision as to how we were going to do that. So the community aspect has been wonderful. Actually, we've also been doing Zoom rehearsals. We had right from March through May, we did our regular Tuesday time. We have a member of the choir who's a Pilates instructor and would do a long physical warm-up. We have various people in the choir who have so many skills and things to offer. We did lots of ear training exercises and fun sight reading things, and we would sing repertoire to the best of our ability and just try to think creatively about how we can stay musically and community-wise engaged. And then the audience aspect is coming behind the scenes as well, producing certain videos, different contents. We've started an interview series on Facebook Live that interviews choral leaders from all over, and that's been really wonderful way to keep our audience engaged, actually, and give them a bit of a behind the scenes look. So I think, like Kari was saying, like when we come out of this, whatever that looks like, I think a lot of these new ways of thinking might actually inform what we do for the better. I think we've been forced to be creative in this time, maybe break some of the traditions that we didn't know we kept, for certain reasons, and just think more outside the box within whatever public health constraints we have going forward. It's actually sort of an opportunity.
I would agree, and it has been an opportunity. I know personally, I'm taking voice lessons with a teacher in Toronto. My piano lessons are with someone in Oakville. So it has led to really wonderful opportunities of ingenuity. And my other question, and this can be for anybody, what other types of creative community building or concert ideas can we expect to see from your choirs in the next few months, if they're not a secret? Anybody can take this one.
Maybe I'll jump in and just say that I personally am relieved that it's the summer right now, because this is a period of time where we're not usually in session.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I believe our organization needs the time to really reflect and figure out what we're going to do. So in the case of Vancouver Bach Choir, which I should also mention, has the children's choirs. My colleague and friend Marisa Gaitan is the music director of that. Some 300 kids ranging from the age of about 5 through like adults who sing in the chamber choir version of that, of our one organization, are all looking at seeing what we can do moving forward. So I'm just very grateful that we have some time built in where our audience is not normally expecting to see much happening. So I do want, if anybody's watching, we're not just sitting around. Believe me, I think we're all on meetings constantly. And I would say one of the positive things that has come out of this is it's incredible to me to see how people come together on meetings. I know I've seen my colleagues on Zoom meetings through Choral Canada, through Opera Canada, Opera America, and so people are really talking to each other in a way that they usually can't when everybody is busy producing and running their own organizations. So that if there is a positive spin-off, I would say it's that, boy, do we ever really feel like a community, and we're all in this together, and we've all been affected by this together. So the fact that people are reaching out and leaning on each other and exchanging ideas, I'd say is a magnificent thing. Moving forward, I hope that when things go back to normal, which they will at some point, that we continue that dialogue, because it enriches all of us.
It definitely does. My next question, again, I'm going to pose to all people, and I'll start with Kari, then go to Cassie, and then go to Kathleen, back to Les. Kari, what drew you to choral music?
Sorry?
What drew you to choral music? Why this genre? Why not chamber? Why not symphony? Why not solo?
Well, I did start off as an orchestral player. So what drew me? There was this German character called Johann Sebastian Bach, would be probably the honest answer. And I was also, I loved sports much more than I did music. So I played an instrument because my mother wanted it more than that I wanted it. So for me, it was sort of the Bach thing was that, when that thing was put in front of you, it was suddenly sports to me. It's, this will need my complete concentration, stamina, everything I know, intuition, everything, just to get through. And for me, that was like, oh, right, this is a good thing. And in a way, I think I'm still on that path. And that was when I was probably 18 when I had that experience. So you can thank that Germanic Lutheran cantor for this. or blame him if you like. But anyway.
What's your favorite sport?
Anything that involves a ball and a bat, a racket, whatever. I mean, you name it, I've played it.
You play tennis?
Oh, of course.
Wonderful. And Cassie, why choral music? What brought you to choral music?
Well, I grew up singing in the Toronto Children's Chorus, which was conducted at the time by its founder, Jean Ashworth Bartle. And that was such a formative experience. My 6 years with the TCC instilled in me an enormous love of the choral art form. And that was where I got my first taste at leading ensembles too. I was put in charge of leading this advanced sight singing group called the Independent Sight Singers. And so the TCC introduced me not just to singing choral music, but to conducting it as well. And growing up in that environment, I think for me, nothing offers that feeling of community like choral singing. Yes, it's a group activity and it unites people with a shared love of something, music in particular. And that's not necessarily unique to choral singing. But it's also so visceral, like this idea of uniting with others by literally using your own body as your instrument alongside other people doing the same. I think it's a unique form of magic and one of the best things about being human.
Kathleen, why choir? Why choral music?
It's a hard one to follow, Cassie. I totally agree. I also had the privilege of growing up in an amazing youth choir. It was called the Newfoundland Symphony Youth Choir. When I was in it, it's now called Shalloway. It was founded by Susan Knight the same year that the Cod moratorium happened in Newfoundland in 1992. I wasn't in it then, but they had this founding notion of cultural responsibility, and that was instilled in us as kids. We toured all over the world and competed and sang and were trained musically, but that was sort of just part of it. It was this sense of ambassadorship for where we were coming from, for our culture, our love of music, and sharing that with people from all over the world. And the people I got to meet just as a very young kid through those incredible opportunities was really formative. It's now conducted by Kelly Walsh, and the organization has grown to be a real force in that province. I was also fortunate to sing with Susan Quinn, such an amazing choral culture in Newfoundland that I grew up in. So it was never really an option not to be a choral musician. I didn't know I could sort of make a living at it, but that came later. But it was always a really huge part of my life, and I was very, very lucky.
We're joined by Ben Ewert from England. Hello, sir. How are you?
Oh. Hello, good to see you. Sorry, jumping in a bit late here. Just must have got the times wrong.
No problem. Time zones are very tricky.
They are a bit tricky.
We're asking the question, what brought you to choral music? So Ben, why choral music?
Is it all right if I jump in here? I feel like I'm jumping the queue, as it were. It's not very Canadian.
Well, you're in England now. We'll forgive it.
It's not very British either. What brought me to choral music? I think I'd grown up in a family that sang together, really, and I'm sure as other choral musicians have been forced into singing situations by their parents or other musicians and that kind of thing. They made us all sing together as a family. I had three siblings, and so with my mom and my dad, we were always singing 4-part music and all that kind of thing. And especially growing up in I grew up in a Mennonite Brethren background, Mennonite Brethren culture, and so singing in church. This was before just on the cusp of them allowing drums into church, that they had 4-part hymn singing and all of that, which was actually a really good basis for instilling in me a love of music and a love of singing in particular. So that's where I learned to sing the bass line, just kind of reading along with the, even though I was trained as a pianist, just reading along with the hymn lines, and then going into undergraduate studies and really getting I had sung in a boys choir, but really getting my first opportunity to sing the classics and things like that at this college, and being given the opportunity to conduct a bit. And so one of my supervisors allowed me to conduct the first movement of Mozart's Requiem in one of our concerts. And it just really blew my mind being up there and working with all those musicians. I'd never done anything like that before. It was really my first taste of conducting, and I really caught the bug from that, I guess, as it were. And that has stuck with me all my life, even though I've done things other than choral music. Choral music is always and always will be a huge part of what I do.
Definitely. Can you tell us, what are your choral activities in the UK like? I think you're the music director at a parish.
Yes.
And
yeah.
Any community choir activity that you're up to?
Yeah, there has been a little bit of that, but mostly my choral activities have surrounded the parish that I work in. So I work as the director of music in a parish outside of London, and we have 3 churches in this parish, and we have a variety of choral groups, so children's choirs and adult choirs, that kind of thing. So a lot of that revolves around the weekly rhythms of choral singing in services and things like that, which, as you can imagine, has been very interrupted over the last 3 months, and we've had to find different ways around that. But a lot of it outside of choral activities in the church, more community-minded things that are happening in this community, which has a fair amount, as you can imagine, of choral activity going on in it. So it's been a little bit interesting jumping into the midst of that as a new person in the community, but great to get to know various conductors around here and choral groups.
That's wonderful. Now, Les, I think I probably know you and Ben the most. Actually, I know you and Ben the most on this call, this conversation. And I know that you are just a superb pianist. You conduct opera and you conduct choral music. So my question is going to be a bit altered for you. What's different for you when you conduct a choir versus when you conduct opera? And what brings you back to choral music? I mean, you come from these big productions, but you're still drawn back to choir. What draws you back to choir?
Well, I mean, singing to me is the most glorious thing. I'm no great singer. I did train as a kid at St. Michael's Choir School, so I was there for 11 years, and singing was just part of everyday life. We spent at least an hour rehearsing a day, which was built into the curriculum. So I have just a lifelong love of singing, and to me, when people are gathered together and making music, there's really nothing quite like it. And I truly believe, actually, that instrumentalists, instrumental music is a kind of emulation of what singing is. Singing to me is the most pure thing. If jokingly before we started the live portion, we were talking about, can anything get worse in this COVID thing? And someone made a comment about, well, I think that, this is the worst that's already happened. And I'm thinking, oh, you never know, like if the asteroid comes and hits Earth, and, most things are wiped out and we have no technology and we have no means of building instruments, we can sing and we can make music. And that was the first music, and then people would hit stones or tap sticks together. So to me, like that, singing is the greatest thing. And as my colleagues have said too, there's just a wealth of repertoire dating back, to thousands of years, and pieces being written constantly. So it's, as I think Cassie said something about this, it's the greatest thing about being human is being able to come together and make music together. So I think we're all very, very fortunate in that.
And you don't have to pay $150,000 for a piano. It's in your body.
That's right. Your voice is a little bit cheaper than the Stradivarius. That's exactly right. It could be even more precious. It is even more precious because it's, your instrument.
It's yours. A shout out to the Canada Council for all the Strads that are out there right now. But yes, our voices are still our own, and they come with us. They're free. Kari, I have a question for you. What's general mentality or energy or mood of your choral singers right now? Are they optimistic? Are they sad? Are they excited? What's their mood meter? And as a director, how do you lead during this time?
Well, I think it's been a it's been a time when all conductors have been forced to be leaders. There's sort of this crisis leadership, which is always difficult, and no one knows it before they're in a crisis. But to your question, they're professionals, so it's a little bit different to people for whom the sort of the greatest reward is actually in the singing. I mean, it is also for them, but they also get a paycheck, and that makes it quite different, because their first worry was, I would imagine, was just survival in this time. But we had a Zoom meeting last week, and it was very much like an amateur choir Zoom meeting. Everyone was just, oh, I'm so glad to see you guys, and I'm so missing singing with you. So in a way, the mood was really, I think, very similar to amateur choirs, and I thought there was a lot of optimism, that we'll be back. We'll be back in the form and shape that is allowed first, and then it's a process after that. And I think, I have to say that Canada has supported the arts marvelously during this time. I mean, our organization, well, we wouldn't be dead, but would be, hardly afloat in the water without the help of the Canadian government and arts councils and so on. So a real big hats off to them. And they've also helped the singers quite a lot with the different programs. So I think there's a lot of optimism, a lot of calm, actually, just, and as Les said, it's summer, hey, let's just follow what's going on in the world and hope that things evolve towards the better. And I think the main thing is, we're going to be back on the bike the minute it's possible. And that's the feeling of the singers as well.
I agree. And I feel like singing can contribute so many positive things to our mental health and our physical health that follows that. And so I've been thinking about people who are missing choirs. And I know that the BC Choral Federation recently had a webinar on grief, missing choral music. And I guess for the first few months of this pandemic, I was just, I'm a grade 5 teacher, so I had to be getting everybody's learning plans ready to go, get new websites, have 10-year-olds learn that their little 4-year-old brother shouldn't walk in his underwear during class. It's happened twice. The dogs are okay, but the little ones in underwear, I draw the line. So I've had to learn a lot of new skills quickly. But once I settled into this rhythm, which I refuse to call a new normal, I think it's a rhythm for now. Things have changed. It's not normal, but it's a rhythm. And then I got thinking, I haven't heard a symphony live since March 12th. I haven't heard a choir since December. And then I felt my heart like really feel sorrow. And I can imagine that the choral community is like, yeah, we've been feeling that the whole time. Where have you been? But it did kind of catch up with me in the last few weeks. And I was drawn to the Bach motets as comfort and catharsis. And I know I'll hear them again. And I know I'll hear them in a beautiful setting, live in a packed house. But for now, people are experimenting with ways of doing things. And what's the coolest thing you guys have seen online about safe ways for choirs to practice? Anybody can jump in on that one. What are some innovative ways that people are rehearsing? Not on Zoom. Are we seeing any innovations out there?
There's something that just came across here. One of my singers forwarded me a video of another choir that they're a part of, and I wouldn't say it's the craziest thing, but maybe one of the most unnerving things, I think, as a conductor, because this choral society has over 100 singers or whatever, and the conductor, they've decided to keep going with rehearsals on their Zoom meetings. So imagine 100 squares on the screen, and everyone's muted except the conductor. So here you're conducting, but you're not receiving any feedback other than what you see visually, which may or may not be in time, depending on internet connection and all of that. So basically, you're blind conducting an ensemble, which I thought was slightly terrifying and disturbing, but very, very, very emotionally healthy for the choir itself, and fulfilling that need as well, keeping them connected. So.
Ben, a question for you. What's your favorite piece to conduct?
Oh, yes, I saw that I saw your list of questions, and I wondered if that one would come up. But
it's here.
Well, I do have a few favorites, but one that just immediately pops to mind is oh my goodness, Casal's Ovos Omnes, which is is taken from Lamentations. Not to get too heavy or depressing here, but it's just a beautiful setting of that passage of scripture, talking about, I think, pertinent to, well, definitely pertinent to any time you're going through any kind of suffering and sense of unease, talking about, people passing by and not looking at the suffering, basically. That has to be one of my all-time favorites. I think it's just a richly harmonically layered piece with alternating highs and lows and throwing back parts between parts of the choir, and very, very satisfying from a composer that he famous for being a cellist, but also a very gifted composer.
That's wonderful. So we've been talking, and I'll throw this to Cassie. We've been talking in our board of directors meetings about diversity and how to move forward, and a new awareness that's been brought to us about like systemic barriers to diversity. And we've mentioned on this chat a little bit about how we're sort of having our old favorites. I mentioned the Bach motets, and I'm not going to not have those as my favorite, but I do know that it is time to venture out. And so, Cassie, I'm wondering, how do we balance all of the fact that historically this music comes from a sort of a Western European art church tradition. We've mentioned the Mass in B minor. We've mentioned the St. Matthew's Passion. We've mentioned Brahms Requiem. So this is coming from a European context. And what can we do now so that, in our kids' choirs, although I think for kids' choirs, the repertoire is much more available, but for professional choirs, what do we do? How do we get apart from this tradition that we're from and welcome new voices? What can we do?
Well, I think step one is being aware of the problem, being aware of the issue. And so we're all working really hard to notice old thought patterns and old patterns of work and research, and to break them. And we need to work even harder to leave our own bubbles. We need to research on the internet, talk to people in real life, have conversations, try to widen our circles and look at new sources, and maybe not worry so much about balance right at the start, and just focus on researching things that are new or have been overlooked for all of us. I think the question of balance might not necessarily be the priority, because of course it has been unbalanced for so long, for so many years. And so if we swing in another direction for a while, I think that's perfectly valid and needed and encouraged, because there's so much out there that we haven't seen or acknowledged or worked with before. So I think the new rather than a balance, at least for me, is a goal right now. And that's all about looking to new sources, being open-minded, and putting in the time to dig deeper and find something else.
It also might be about commissioning.
Yes. Yeah.
Shout out to the BC Arts Council and SOCAN. And Kari mentioned all these wonderful organizations that support us and have kept us afloat in these pretty stormy waters. And I feel that's a really great transition for us to thank our sponsors for today's podcast, which is 2X Education and Tom Lee Music, who has kindly provided us with a way to get this fantastic new podcasting microphone. And we're grateful for our private donors that make projects like this possible. And I just want to thank all of our participants. We have Dala from the Vancouver Bach Choir. We have Kari Turunen from Vancouver Chamber Choir. And we have Cassie Luftspring from the Vancouver Academy of Music, and Kathleen Allan with Canzona and Amadeus Choir. And Ben, I don't know the name of your parish. What is the name of your parish?
The name is Chalfont St. Peter's parish, basically. Chalfont St. Peter. It's a bit of an odd name to be in the UK, but
well,
you can just call it St. Peter's Parish. How about that?
St. Peter's Parish. This has been a wonderful opportunity for us, and I just want to thank everyone for joining. Kari, do you have a Finnish greeting for your Finnish friends that might be tuned in at about 10 p.m.?
Terve.
Wonderful. I want to thank everyone for joining us today on Facebook. And if you're looking for this on YouTube, it will be there in about 45 minutes. And we've recorded the conversation. This has been a pleasure. And again, we acknowledge that this conversation took place on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish Nations. And we'll be having an orchestral version of Coffee with Conductors in 2 weeks plus 2 days. And that's with Naomi Wu, Jonathan Bloxham, Jay Lambate, and we're really looking forward to that as well. So thank you to everyone, and it was great to speak with all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.